You're sitting in a room that looks like your life, familiar furniture, familiar routine, but something doesn't fit, not anymore. It's not the light, not the walls. It's the silence between the scenes, that strange stillness when no one's looking, when the performance ends and the truth remains. And maybe you've felt it, like watching your own existence as if it were someone else's film, a bad one, the kind you'd turn off halfway through because the main character never changes. He repeats. He hides, he performs like a background actor in his own story. The scenes feel flat, the dialogue recycled. There's no climax, no catharsis, only a slow decay masked by busyness. You judge him, not because he's weak, but because he pretends. He walks through each day as if duty and numbness were enough. And the worst part, he knows it. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And Montaigne warned, "The soul that has no fixed goal loses itself, for as they say, to be everywhere is to be nowhere." Now let me ask you something you've probably never asked yourself directly. If your life were a movie, would you still be watching? Would you care about the character? Or would you be silently rooting for the plot to end? This isn't about drama, it's about truth, about that slow erosion inside you that nobody sees, that feeling that the script isn't yours, that the director is missing, that maybe the actor died years ago and the scenes just kept going. So here's where we begin, not with answers, not with solutions, but with one brutal, necessary truth. You don't hate your life, you hate who you became in it. And that is the first sign that you're ready to change. Not everything, just the part that finally realizes this movie isn't over, but it won't rewrite itself. The hidden cycle of self-punishment you call routine. It begins the moment you wake up, not with a scream, but with silence, not with dread, but with that familiar dullness, a life on loop, repeating, numbing, maintaining appearances. You rise not because you want to, but because not rising feels worse. There's a strange comfort in repetition, in knowing the next move, the next excuse, the next self-betrayal. But underneath it all, there's guilt, a slow, acidic guilt for the life you didn't choose, the one you abandoned without saying goodbye. You call it commitment, responsibility, but what if it's penance? Penance for having once dreamed, penance for having once felt something you can't feel anymore. And so you build your day like a prison cell, functional, clean, predictable, but you don't see the bars because you painted them the same color as discipline. Jung described this as an adaptive neurosis, when you adapt so perfectly to the world that your individuality dies quietly in the background. You become respected, reliable, but you vanish. You start to exist only through function, only through what others need you to be. And every act of repetition is a small act of self-erasure. But it doesn't look tragic. It looks organized, stable, adult. And maybe that's the most dangerous part, that your pain wears the mask of normalcy so well. Even you forget its pain. The routine isn't neutral. It's not just how life is. It's a self-inflicted forgetting of who you were, of what you wanted, of the moment you gave up quietly and called it growth. But now something is stirring, a whisper beneath the routine, a subtle revolt inside your silence. And maybe that's why you're still watching this. Because some part of you remembers this wasn't supposed to be the whole movie. The addiction to seeming functional while you're dying inside. From a distance, you look fine. You answer messages. You get things done. You laugh when it's expected. You nod when it's required. You play the part so well, even the mirror believes you. But inside, something's rotting. Not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly. Like an echo that keeps returning to a room no one visits anymore. You've become a master of disguise, of emotional camouflage, of carrying a silent scream beneath a polished smile. This isn't survival. This is emotional exhaustion dressed up as competence. There's a moment, late at night or in the middle of a sentence, when the mask slips for half a second and you catch a glimpse of it, the emptiness, the weight, the unbearable truth that you've forgotten how to feel, without faking it. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when the why fades into static? When every how becomes another scene in someone else's script? You keep performing because stopping feels dangerous. Because if you stop pretending, everything might collapse. So you keep going, you keep answering, you keep delivering. But each day adds another layer between you and yourself, until your life becomes a sequence of perfected reactions, flawless, efficient, and completely detached from who you are. And deep down, you know it. You know that you've become a character in someone else's play, that the applause means nothing, that the role no longer fits, but you're afraid of what will remain if you take it off. You don't need to break down. You've already broken, silently, beautifully, invisibly. Now you're just trying to remember the way back, not to joy, not even to purpose, just to something that feels like you, the inner lie that turns pain into identity. At some point, the pain stopped being a wound and became a name, not something that happened to you, but something you are. You stopped introducing yourself as a person and started presenting yourself as a history of damage. Because when the hurt stays long enough, it carves shapes, and those shapes become familiar, comfortable even. You cling to the suffering not because it feels good, but because it's yours, because without it, there would be silence. And silence is terrifying when your identity is built on echoes. You tell yourself you've healed, but the truth is, you've just learned how to wear the trauma like a second skin, invisible but always there, shaping every reaction, every relationship, every rejection. You don't let go, not because you can't, but because if you did, you fear you'd vanish. You've built a self around the scars, and the idea of shedding them feels like death, not metaphorical, real, because who would you be without the pain, without the story, without the righteous rage that keeps you anchored? This is the paradox, the lie we feed ourselves to survive, that the suffering gives us shape, that to heal is to betray the version of us that endured it. But the truth is sharper. You're not the pain, you're the one who survived it. You're the witness, the observer. And every day you cling to the trauma is another day you delay your rebirth. The character in your story isn't changing, not because he can't, but because he believes that if he stops suffering, he'll become invisible. And maybe that's the real terror. Not the pain itself, but the unbearable possibility that there's a life beyond it, and you no longer know how to live it. Self-abandonment disguised as self-sufficiency. There was a time you needed someone, not as decoration, not as entertainment, but as shelter. And when they didn't come, or worse, when they did and left wounds instead, you learned the art of survival. You called it independence. You wore it like armor. I'm fine on my own. And maybe you are. But independence born from betrayal doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like exile. You stopped reaching out. Not because you don't crave connection, but because needing someone became synonymous with humiliation. So you built strength, or something that looked like it, but beneath that strength is a child, small, forgotten, still waiting to be held without being hurt. You've mistaken silence for serenity, control for healing, isolation for peace. But Jung would call this the shadow of strength, the false self built not from wholeness, but from fear, a version of you that exists only to prevent further pain. You became your own shelter, and in the process, abandoned every part of you that still longed to be seen. You smile in public, but it's a practiced smile, a performance to reassure the world that you're above needing anything. And maybe you've convinced them, but late at night, when the performance fades, You feel it, that ache, that echo, that quiet question. What if self-sufficiency was just a well-decorated version of self-abandonment? Because true strength isn't, "I don't need anyone." It's the courage to admit when you do, and the quiet rebellion of being real, even if no one claps, even if no one stays. The spectator syndrome, when you watch life happen but don't participate. There's a strange detachment that grows when you've been hurt too many times. You don't cry as much, you don't scream, you just observe, as if your life belonged to someone else. You walk into rooms but your presence stays behind. You talk but the words feel rehearsed. You laugh but something remains untouched. Untouched and untouched again until you forget what real contact feels like. It's not that you don't care, it's that, being and so, you retreat. Not, you watch yourself have conversations, you see yourself making choices, but it's like watching a movie you've already seen, one where the ending never changes. This is what dissociation looks like. Not the dramatic collapse they show in films, but the quiet withdrawal of the soul. A defense mechanism carved by repetition. Too many disappointments, too many scenes where you tried to rewrite the story, and the ink ran dry. And so you become the ghost, visible, functional, polite, but vacant, not dead, just distant. You learn how to be everywhere without ever really arriving. You participate in life the way one watches a train pass by, close enough to hear it, but never daring to board. Because if you really got back in, if you felt fully, what if it shattered you again? So you hover, over your own days, over your own name, as if waiting for a version of yourself that remembers how to live, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because they finally believe they belong in the scene, the psychological terror of almost. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You almost changed, almost walked away, almost started over. You packed your bags, you wrote the message. You stood at the edge of a new version of yourself, and then something pulled you back. It wasn't fear of failure, it was something quieter, more intimate. The fear of becoming and still being disappointed. Almost became your safety net. A comforting illusion that something is happening, even when nothing is. A way to delay the rupture. Because movement feels like progress, even when it goes in circles. You tell yourself, "I'm just not ready. I need more time. Next month. Next Monday. After this." But days become seasons, and seasons become years, and the life you wanted slowly turns into a myth you only revisit when insomnia forces memory into motion. The truth is brutal. You're not stuck. You're circling yourself, afraid that the door you open might not lead to salvation, but to another form of emptiness. So you stay in the waiting room, where it's familiar, predictable, and silently suffocating. Because almost doesn't hurt like failure. It doesn't scar. It doesn't expose. It just delays and delays again until you forget what it was like to feel urgency about your own existence. Meanwhile, the scenes roll on, the credits draw closer, and the audience, if there ever was one, begins to leave. Not because you failed, but because you never entered the story. You hovered in the prologue, waiting for the right moment to be the protagonist. But there is no right moment, only a decision. A terrifying, necessary fracture in the timeline, where the character finally stops rehearsing and begins to live. The exhaustion of pretending to be what others expect. You've become a gallery of faces, one for work, one for family, one for moments when you're alone, and even then, it's still a mask. Not to impress, but to survive. Each persona you wear was forged in response to expectation. You became adaptable, efficient, a mirror that reflects what others need to see. But after years of this quiet shape-shifting, you no longer remember which reflection was the original. There's a fatigue that doesn't come from work. It comes from performance, from maintaining versions of yourself that should have been buried long ago. Versions you outgrew, but still inhabit because people love those versions, because they're safer, predictable, and to remove them would be to risk being seen, naked, unfinished, unsure. You fear the silence that follows when you stop performing, because what if there's nothing underneath? What if you aren't anything without the roles? Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." But how do you become what's been buried beneath layers of applause and approval? You were never taught how to just be. You were taught how to please, how to win love by erasing the parts of you that might disrupt the script. But there's a reckoning. It comes in whispers, in breakdowns that don't look like collapse, but like numbness, in the quiet question that rises when you're alone. What if I was never meant to be liked by everyone? Because the truth is, no mask, no persona, no role will ever satisfy the ache for authenticity. And you can only pretend for so long before your own soul stops answering the call. You're tired, not because you've done too much, but because everything you've done was to be someone you're not. Watch your life like a movie, in silence. Step outside yourself, not in theory, in sensation. Imagine the last week of your life projected on a blank screen, no filters, no edits, just scenes. You waking up, you checking your phone, you brushing your teeth with thoughts already numbing you, you walking through the day like a character locked in a role they never auditioned for. Now give the character a name, not yours, a fictional one. Watch their actions, their expressions, their pauses. Would you care about them? Would you believe them? Would you root for them or feel a kind of pity wrapped in impatience? Describe it all, not in data, but in narrative, scene by scene. The silence in the room, the fake smile, the invisible weight they carry, the moment they almost speak up but swallow it instead, the meals eaten in silence, the eyes that dim the second the door closes. Now, read it aloud, or better, listen. Let it echo back into your body. This is not fiction. This is a mirror, and the truth reflected there might shatter something inside you, but that shattering is sacred, because the script you're living, it wasn't fully written by you. It was shaped by trauma, culture, survival. The ego acts, the unconscious directs, and most of the time, you're not even on set, but here's the revelation. If you can observe it, you can revise it. You are not just the actor, you are the author who forgot they held the pen. And even now in this silence, you still do. The script is still in your hands. There's no final scene, no perfect resolution, no applause waiting just beyond the last line. Life doesn't give you a clean ending, only revisions. You may feel like the character has already been written, that the personality you wear is too embedded to change. But even that belief is just another scene, one you can step out of. Jung called it individuation, the slow, silent process of becoming who you truly are, not who they expected, not who pain shaped, but who remained beneath it all. And it doesn't start with a transformation, it starts with grief, with the collapse of illusions, with looking at the protagonist you've been playing and realizing you never chose him. You see the lie, the avoidance, the fear, the quiet compromises stitched into every chapter, and yes, it hurts. Because you're not just watching a movie you'd walk out of, you're watching a self you no longer recognize, a self you no longer want to be. But that moment of rupture, is the beginning of authorship, when the performance crumbles, when the applause fades, when the lights go out and there's nothing left but silence. You hear something, a voice, raw, unscripted, yours. It's not too late. You haven't missed it. You're still here. And maybe the pain of seeing it all so clearly is proof that something inside you still wants the truth. So let it hurt, let it break, let it end. Because endings are not failures, they're invitations. And somewhere, buried under the role, the mask, the almosts, a real self is waiting, not to be rescued, not to be healed, but to be written. and this time with your hand on the pen.